I developed hypervigilance because of the relationship
Yeah.
that I shared with my mom. In the Memory Palace, you mention how Natalia is a vigilant sleeper, and you also wake up at the slightest sound. You say sleep with a dolphin's vigilance with half the brain awake. Obviously, when you're a child and not really understanding the that it is a mental illness, I became hypervigilant because I would always try and evaluate situations and remove things, factors that could provoke my mum. When there is a schizophrenic patient, and there are voices happening, everything is a trigger. So how do you remove all of these provocations, right? But what I realized over the last, say, 10 years, I noticed that the hypervigilance was a good quality that I still have and that I use in my work. For example, I'm usually like the band's manager. So I get to a gig and I'm already assessing everything. My mind,
Right.
yeah, and
Yes.
my mind is full on. And I'm
And
like,
you know how to read the room.
exactly,
And you know when there's someone's going to be a heckler or a problem.
yes. And there's this
Yeah.
other sense that I developed, which if I didn't have a schizophrenic mum, I wouldn't have this because it makes you pay attention to detail. So, really, my question, Mira, is what are the positive qualities you think you developed because of this situation of living with a schizophrenic mum?
That's a good question. Well, one, I think it makes me more empathetic to people's neurodiverse issues.
Right.
Um, I'd like to be more empathetic. Sometimes I'm sure I'm judgmental when I don't understand something. I think it's made me a more empathetic person. Definitely, I have, but you talk about this kind of, it's almost like the hypervigilance protects me in
Mm-hmm.
it has protected me in some situations. I don't walk through the city clueless. When I go to New York City, for example, or I lived for many years in a really, really tough neighborhood in Chicago because that's where in the, bad neighborhoods is where you could get a large artist loft and it was cheap rent. But we had a lot of gang activity. There was a lot of assaults in that neighborhood, and nobody messed with me.
Yeah.
Nobody messed with me. I really learned how to walk through the city. It also has made me pick up really fast when there's trouble or when someone's in trouble, like really fast. I am not someone who should be a first responder because I would be too good at it. And it just would be non-stop triggering. But I
Right.
have been in so many situations where people are not aware that like this woman is having a stroke, or this person is in need, or something is wrong, and I know. I've never said this publicly, but I've saved a couple lives before. One was a girl who was drowning. In fact, I think I've told one person in my life. I
Well,
say, and nobody seemed to know. And so that kind of vigilance has helped me, as well as hindered me, because sometimes you just need to
chill
friggin' calm down. Um,
Yeah.
but so I would say definitely agree with you on that. Also, it's something about, I don't know what it is, something about the empathetic piece. People tell me their secrets. And sometimes some people are able to tell me things they don't tell anyone else. And sometimes that can be a burden because I don't want to be the only person they tell something to. I feel like it's also a gift I can't take lightly, and
Right.
there's a responsibility for it I have to have. And I think it also has made me, when I used to teach children, I was able to pinpoint the kids who might be
Yes.
struggling with something really, really dangerous at home, and alert their teachers. I can just tell, you know.
My brother is a primary school. He's the vice
Principal.
We were talking the other day and he said, oh, there were kids that were fighting, and it actually was quite violent, but because so many situations happen, he has become a little more accustomed to, okay, got to break these kids up and everything. But we both immediately said there's something going on at home. It's as if you're in a constant state of alertness all the time. It's like being wired. And I have it. There was this part in your memoir where you say, my mum was the relentless silver bell in my ear, and my mum was the same way with me. Like I could hear her all the time. And with all of the range of dynamics that a voice can have, my mum had all of them, from prayer like whispers all the way up to, just hoarse screaming, high pitched. And that affected my auditive sensitivity. So my neighbor can be talking and I will hear it so loud. I can hear everything. It's just, it's like my ears are on this. I have bionic ears, and it's because of this, because of having lived with my mom.
It's that, plus you have the music gene, and so I have both as well. Add a brain injury to that, and it's like, but I have to say the things that help me with that, when I'm drawing and I'm really, really in the zone, and I've struggled with music ever since I got back into music slowly after, this accident in 99, at the end of 99. But then I had another brain injury in 2018. But before that, I was slowly getting back into music. I was in about 5 music groups before 1999. And so I've slowly tried to reconnect with music, but it's been hard. But when I am playing an instrument or when I'm drawing, I am so in the present moment. As well as certain things like I canoe. I just am in love with canoeing, and I go with my husband and our little dog, and it's just water, sky, herons, turtles, beavers. It's just pure, simple beauty, and that really helps. Writing is another thing. It's a little bit of a different process. It's not the same sort of present sort of flow. It depends what I'm working on. And the sound sensitivity totally can relate too. It's weird, when I had that big car accident, the bones in my ears got messed about, and a couple broke, and I became eventually deaf in one ear. Oddly enough, it was kind of a relief. And I often wear a headset to block out sound, because I can't filter it as much. But when I did get my ear operated on, and suddenly that ear could hear, that was a blessing and a curse. So it was a blessing in that listening to music again, it was just mind blowing and so emotional. But now I hear better. So now I'm, so I know I live in the country. I live where there's no sound. You can see the stars. The only thing you hear maybe is a distant coyote. You don't hear anything. And still I have 2 sound machines and earplugs. And it's just a psychological thing, because something could make a sound. You never know. And it could wake me up. So, I mean, it's ridiculous, but.
Yes. I do that too, because I also live in a part of Mexico City where it's kind of country with not so much the city. And I moved here, I had hardly any neighbors. And then 2 years ago, this family moved in downstairs, and they have this dog that doesn't stop barking. So I know that, and it's like literally like, I understand that it is my sensitivity, but man, before I go to sleep, I have my earplugs and I put the cushion over my head, and I, put everything I can on top, because I don't want to be woken up. So I can relate to that too.
Well, our dog is a little Sheltie, and we've Shetland sheepdog. We've had her 2 years. Our other dog was a rescue and barely barked. I was a little concerned because Shelties can be neurotic and bark a lot, and I was really worried about it. But she only barks at the random car that goes too fast, and I agree with her. They're going too fast. And she'll bark as we're leaving. And then she's just if I get in the car, she has opinions about it. But other than that, she's fine and quiet and very calm. And thank goodness, because
Yeah.
I cannot abide by that, the barking, incessant barking.
Yeah.
So.
Mira, I think you captivated the innocence of a child when living such a traumatic situation at home. You talk about when you were a girl, you made up magic rules, and perhaps with those rules, for example, if I cross my fingers or if I don't step on cracks, my mum will get better. And I had rules like that too. And one of mine was if I just stay quiet the rest of the day, surely my mum will get better. I often thought that I was the one that was to blame for her behavior. Did you ever think that as a child?
My thing was more, if I could only figure out what to do, I could make her better. So I took on, a kind of unrealistic responsibility, which is one of the things I think I carry to this day. If I could just do something, it would fix someone's situation. It creates that sort of unrealistic kind of codependency, with like I definitely have found myself being overly helpful or overly responsible for people that really should take responsibility for themselves, in the past. And I always have to watch myself, because there's something in me that's like, oh, I could totally take that on. I could totally take all the responsibility for that thing.
Right.
So that's how I didn't really feel. I don't remember feeling like something was my fault. I think I felt that more with my grandfather, because you never knew what could set him off. It could be you put the butter dish in the wrong place, and he would go ballistic. So I would walk on eggshells with him, never knowing like what the rules were that day. With my mother, it was more like I've got to make her better, and it's all down to me. And part of that was, I don't know if you remember in the book, there was, my grandfather had a sister,
Toda.
Aunt Toda, who was from, I never understood where my family came from, because some were from Bulgaria, some were from Macedonia, which is, in the former Yugoslavia. Some seem to be from Turkey. I have no idea. I have a feeling that their origins might have been Roma, actually. That's a whole other conversation. But my grandfather's sister had been a healer in her village, an herbalist, and she was very superstitious and wore garlic around her neck and put dabbed ash on every mirror because your soul could get sucked through or something like that. Was also very religious, and in terms of Russia, she was a Russian, or she went to a Russian Orthodox church, which my grandfather went to and took me. But she decided when I was 5 that I had the gift,
Right.
and she would take me around to these sick and dying people to lay hands on them for hours, hours and hours and hours. I think it created this belief as a child. Like, I think she died when I was about 8. So for like 8 or 9, for about 3 or 4 years, when I wasn't in school, she was taking me around to help people. And I think it cultivated this sort of the sense that I somehow had the power
Right.
to heal someone, to change this terrible thing, to transform this base metal to gold like an alchemist. I think that really screwed me up, because somehow it instilled this belief that it was, I could fix my mom somehow if I just made enough drew enough pictures for her, or if I just cooked for her, or if I, did whatever she wanted, it was down to me. And which is just a sad thing, because obviously it wasn't. But there was also this thing where they took me to my great aunt and my grandfather would take me to funerals in the Russian Orthodox Church, and they would have me kiss. They'd lift me up and put me in the coffin to kiss the corpse. And it was terrifying. But there was also this idea, like, you have the power to send this soul into this other realm, send them off to heaven or wherever they're going to go. And while on a certain level, I felt like I'm just a little nothing, I'm this neglected little nothing, I'm a little bug. I also, the flip side of it was that I had the power to change someone's life. So it was pretty messed up. But the transformative part of that, as I started to get older, I remember I wrote and illustrated my very first book when I was 14. It was about this magic bird that lived in the forest that sang and brought beauty to people's lives. But you had to go through all these trials and tribulations to find this bird. And I recently discovered this picture I drew that was one of the illustrations. And it says that, it's this description of this bird said, she sang to the lonely, she comforted the homeless, and could awaken the love in sleeping hearts. Fast forward years later, when I wrote my book, The Wonderling, I'm working on book 2 now, about this little creature, this one-eared fox human character who has the gift of music but doesn't know it yet because he's so, oppressed where he is. He hears his mother tells him before she dies, you must sing to the lonely. You are a wonderling. You must sing to the lonely. You must comfort the frightened and awaken the love in sleeping hearts. And that has been my motto my whole life. It has always been my motto. And so I think taking the essence of what my great aunt Toda believed in me, certainly I can't heal people with laying down on my hands on them. I mean, just about everybody died. I mean, from who I laid hands on. At the same time, it instilled this belief that there is something in us that can uplift others. You can transform someone's life. In my belief is through, I really, believe that art and stories, and to me, the highest art form of all to me is music, because it crosses all boundaries, it crosses all cultures, it crosses everything. And so, that I suppose was the gift that my great aunt gave me, was that, yes, I do have something in me that can do some good. It's just not necessarily doesn't necessarily have to do with, placing a necklace of garlic on anyone and, putting my hands on them and kissing them when they die. It has to do with this other thing, which is, no matter how oppressed you are, no matter how the world hurls its furniture at you, and no matter how awful your situation is at home, there's something in us that is beyond all this, and that is really full of life and full of music and full of stories and full of hope. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I'm sure you understand. I've heard you sing, so I'm sure you understand.
Thank you. Yeah. Mira, how did you cope with the guilt of choosing your health and survival over being with your mum the 17 years she was homeless?
Well, it was hard. I mean, I felt like in many ways I had to choose between not just my own health, but what my sister my sister's needs and my mother's needs. I had to choose between those two because it was really my sister who asked, my sister changed her name and asked me to change my name. And I had an art career in my old name, which was Myra Hare. I had, had one person shows. Had been in the gallery. I had all these, I had a whole art career, but I was in this transition of turning into a writer. And so I was actually got my first publishing contract. This was like in 1990, 91. And so I felt like I had to decide. That was the point where my mother became homeless. And so all these things were happening at once. I knew that if she knew where I was, I had moved from my place and I didn't, we were writing a few post office boxes. I knew that if I kept up the way I was, I would just have to take her in, and my life, and I have a couple medical problems that would immediately get aggravated and get really bad whenever the phone would ring. It would be her or anything. My sister, who she hadn't been to therapy. I don't think she's ever seen a therapist. She didn't do all the reading I had on mental illness. She had really pulled back much earlier than I had from my mom. And I think I could always handle my mother better. I would just be very, very calm and my sister would freak out. Who wouldn't freak out? I mean, but I would take it in on my body. I would take it. I was very somatic. I still am. So I felt like I had to decide between taking care of myself, taking care of my sister's needs, taking care of my mom. And in the end, I felt like if I was in touch with my mom and my mom refused to get any help, which was the bargain, like you have to get a social worker and you have to get on medication. If she wasn't going to do that, I chose my sister. I chose doing what my sister suggested and wanted, because it would have been nearly impossible to have a relationship with my sister if I was in touch or constant touch with my mother in a physical sense. But the guilt was, it was horrible. And all those 17 years, I can't even think of one time where my sister and I talked about it. It was kind of the unspoken thing. It's really been after her death, my mother's death, that my sister's been able to talk about it a bit with me. And so I carried it alone, and it was pretty awful. But I saw a couple therapists, and that helped. I was a supporter of NAMI, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. I went to a support group for a little bit. I read everything you could possibly read on mental illness, on schizophrenia. I'm that person who, if I'm faced with something, whether it's TBI, traumatic brain injury, or schizophrenia or something, I want to know everything about it. I want to know the science because it helps me understand what is actually going on in the brain, and it helps me be more empathetic. That all helped definitely with the guilt. I would send my mom things. I knew that she was trying to learn how to draw, and my mother was this polymath who was learning every subject in the world. And she really wanted to learn how to draw. It was one of the things. So I would send her art supplies through the post, and I would always send her these calendars from museums with pictures in them. And I can't go into a museum now and look at a museum calendar with, say, Matisse or something without this pang of my mom, thinking about my mom and thinking of her being homeless or being in a shelter. But it's interesting. I don't know if you dream about your mother still in your life. I dreamt about her all those years, constantly. Some were nightmares. Most were nightmares. After my book was published and out there, and it came out in 2011. I finished it in 2010. Since that time, I've had 2 dreams about my mother. She left, gone. And in a way, it's kind of sad. Like,
Mm.
And oddly enough, when you asked me to do this interview, not long after that, I had a dream about her, and she
Mm.
was like a normal person. It was like, it was lovely. It was like we were just talking like mother and daughter. It was like, where have you been? Where are you? It's like, it was pretty, yeah. But it's very strange. I don't dream about her anymore. But I sometimes have, there is neurotic guilt and there's adult guilt. Neurotic guilt is, when you feel guilty for something that that's really not your fault, and adult guilt is you did something wrong and you should feel guilty.
Right, right.
So it's important, I think, for adult children of mentally ill parents to separate those things and acknowledge they're there, acknowledge the feeling, but acknowledge that it's not guilt born out of something you were at fault, about, you know.
I could feel in the memory palace this yearning or this connection with your mum anywhere that you were, say in Italy or, all of the trips. And you would think, is she warm? Is she safe if I buy her these gloves? And there were shooting stars in Italy, and you wished for her to be better, for her to be well. If I can share a little bit of my own story, and that's why I wanted to ask you this question, is I am living in Mexico City and my mum lives in Sydney. And
I was wondering about that. You said she was in a psych ward. Is she in Sydney?
she's in Australia, yeah. And
Okay.
their support in terms of psychiatric mental health is amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better country for my mum to be in. But I also didn't understand at the time when I decided to live here that it was, in a way, me putting space between us. And I understand that now. And she was stable when I decided to stay, and I always told myself, okay, you were there for her in the most difficult times and during your most difficult, complicated years, which was when I was a child and my adolescent years. So I didn't feel guilty for having stayed at the time, but as the years went on, I did start to feel guilty, especially when she started to have when she decided not to take medication anymore. And at times I feel that guilt because my brother has become now the principal caretaker of
Because he's there.
because he's there. And I've talked to him about it, and I apologize, and I mean, words aren't enough to can't express really how I feel, because I do feel guilty with him, with my mum, and my brothers, because I've even offered maybe I should just move back to Australia, and but what are you going to do here? And then that creates another world of doubt because I'm set up in Mexico City, but there is a guilt with my mum being the daughter, because my brother is a male, and he says to me, man, there are things that are uncomfortable for me. Like she asked me to go get her underwear and things like that, and I just feel terrible. There is that other part of understanding that there's a mental illness, and then there's also understanding that your mental health is important, because I knew that if I stayed with my mum, that if she ever got very ill again, that it would pretty much be my responsibility. And I know how bad it can get. So that's why I wanted to ask you about it.
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, I mean, I knew that the main responsibility would be on me,
Right.
because I can handle it. I've
Right.
always been able to handle it. And it's weird. I don't know if this happens to you, but in a crisis, I become very calm, and except when a pet gets injured and I am completely a mess. For
Right.
some reason, when a couple times when my last dog got hurt, I was like, oh, I was like hysterical.
Right,
But
right, right.
but normally in crises, I've been in a lot of sort of dramatic situations, not just with my mom, but in, traveling and, bomb scares, like really crazy stuff. I'm really calm, and I knew that I would be taking it all on,
Right.
and my sister would not, and just it's not in her DNA. She's made to do something else and help other kinds of people, but not my mom. But she was definitely there at the end, and she was
Yeah.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
It felt like there was a circle being closed, right?
yeah,
With your
right.
family. Yeah.
I still have suddenly, a feeling of guilt with even if a friend who is going through something and somehow I think it's my fault and I have nothing to do with it. I mean,
Oh,
it's so stupid. And I know it's neurotic guilt. Like oh, I should have been more, I should have called them more often, or I should, you know,
yes.
yeah, it's really, and then, now that I have I live with having a brain injury, and I get forgetful, and I also can't handle as much. Um, I often feel guilty that I don't do as much for people as I used to. I used to do a lot more for people. And so then I feel guilty. It's just ridiculous.
Mm.
So I totally understand what you're going through. You can only do what you can do. I don't know. It's important that, if your mother is in a place that has great or much better social services, that's the best thing. I mean, my mother was in Ohio, and I remember very distinctly, and when Reagan came to office in 1980, 6 months after he came to office, the community center that used to teach, they did group therapy, they taught life skills for mentally ill outpatients. They had all these services that my mom was part of, and she was doing okay. And then it was taken away. And I think something like a third of the people that went through that life skills program committed suicide. I mean, it was horrible. Everything was taken away. And Ohio, I don't know what it's like now, but I remember when my mom, there's a scene in the book where my mother, my grandmother, I got my grandmother placed with, my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. I got her placed with a guardian in a in a sort of little group home situation, which was really great. And my mom sold the house and had nowhere to go, and she, you know, she was clearly being out. She was out of control. Clearly, needed to be hospitalized. It was a really horrible, horrible situation. Um, and basically, when I talked to the powers that be, the probate court, they were like, well, unless your mother has already attacked you, you know, you can't get any help from us. You can't get a restraining order, you can't get her hospitalized. But if she stole something from you, we could do something about with that. Like if she stole, I said, if she stole your TV, that's something that we could work with.
Could pursue, like as if the everything else were insignificant.
Right.
Yeah. No. That's so complicated. So complicated.
And in the United States, every state is different. And, our country is a mess right now. I mean, it's obvious our country's a mess. So um, I I'm fortunate that I live in Massachusetts where there's a little more sanity here than, say,
Yeah.
Ohio or some other places.
Right.